Our reading this morning is from Laura Horton Ludwig. This is Spirit and Body Joined Together. Take a moment to breathe into the silence. Our breath is always with us. We can always come back to the breath, our anchor, our grounding, our freedom. Spirit of life and love, we are here not just minds and hearts, but bodies too. We human beings, spirit and body joined together. On this day, we send out a prayer or a wish that every person, every being may be safe and well in body and spirit. May every person be well, and may we treat every person with respect and kindness and love. On this day, when we consider the connections between our bodies and our spirits, we lift up our hope and aspiration that all people will live in freedom to give and guard their bodies as seems best to them, and to exercise their own powers of moral discernment around their fertility and creative potential. May we remember that it is especially challenging for those of us living in poverty to exercise these rights, and may our society support them in every way possible. We say a special prayer for all those who have experienced violence or abuse or any other form of damage to their being, which is so precious. May they know safety and healing. For all of us, may our physical being be a source of delight and well-being as we live in this world. May every being be safe and well in body and in spirit. May every person be well, and may we be vessels of compassion for everyone we meet. Amen. This fall, I preached about the tactics of fascist politics and how they are affecting our country and even our congregations. I've drawn heavily from Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, the Politics of Us and Them, and the Reverend Cecilia Kingman's 2023 Berry Street essay, My Little Pony Was Right, Fascisms Without and Within. Today we are going to do a bit of a deep dive into exploring the tactics Stanley calls sexual anxiety interconnected with others. Quick recap. There are 10 tactics in total, all of which feed off of and into each other and are used to divide us further. The 10 are a mythic past, propaganda, anti-intellectualism, unreality, hierarchy, victimhood, law and order, sexual anxiety, Sodom and Gomorrah, urban versus rural, and Arbeit macht frei, work shall make you free. Othering through standards and ideals about what work looks like, including tearing into labor unions that bring people together across class. Sexual anxiety builds a bunch off the ideas of hierarchy, that is traditional patriarchal roles and structures like having a man as the head of household and primary breadwinner. Hierarchy is dependent on the ideals of heteronormativity and heterosexual marriage, man and wife, and the desire that this model be replicated at all levels of society. When the man in power, the nation's leader, is viewed as the father of the nation, saying things like, only I can protect you, only I can fix this, the image projected is one of strength. Any threat to patriarchal manhood and the traditional, that is, heteronormative family, is a threat to the leader's image as strong. This absolutely includes queer and LGBTQIA+ folks, single women, and so-called non-traditional family arrangements, and makes it so that they need to be quashed or eliminated because their existence undermines that single story of strength and leader as father. We've seen this pointedly in U.S. history with the untrue claims of rape by Black men and boys of white women and girls. Lynchings happen regularly because of these false claims. White people in general have believed that rape was a common problem with a justifiable outcome because, as Stanley writes, that would make rational sense of the fear and anxiety they felt over the potential loss of status associated with accepting their Black fellow citizens as equals. That is distressed about one thing, especially one that's unacceptable to be openly distressed about, is redirected at something else that is more acceptable. We saw this with our current president's first famous early campaign propaganda about Mexican immigrants crossing the border, who he referred to as rapists. This rhetoric was taken as truth by people across the country and was and is still used to vilify immigrants of whatever non-white origin, including children and refugees. Often these are people coming to this country because our politics or economics have done something that has made them feel that they need to leave their homes. The U.S. doesn't have exclusive rights on this tactic. Stanley references the ethnic cleansing assault in Myanmar of the Rohingya people, a minority Muslim population. It has also been seen in Europe with accusations of Middle Eastern men raping white women. It is seen repeatedly throughout the world. I'm sure that this has also been a claim used by Jewish Israelis against Palestinians. Again, where there is already stress and anxiety in the system, like the American populace, due to any single or group of factors like politics, economics, or name whatever you want, this tactic gets used against a variety of groups. This is one reason that we've seen so much demonization of trans folks, with the introduction of bathroom bills as one example that require people, including children, to only use the bathroom that correlates with their sex assigned at birth on their birth certificates. This argument has been that trans folks are sexual predators and sexual deviants. This connects with Stanley's identified tactic of law and order. We make certain categories of people illegal so that we understand the created need to protect ourselves from them. So an opportunity is taken to create a group of people that we have decide are other, and then legislate against them so that we can defend ourselves regardless of whether or not any of this is accurate. This also relies on individuals to do the policing of spaces like bathrooms, which is a whole separate concern that we don't have time for today. Trans women are especially targeted because of the belief that they have chosen femininity, which threatens patriarchal ideals of roles. Stanley quotes from Julia Serrano's book, Whipping Girl. In a male-centered gender hierarchy where it is assumed that men are better than women and that masculinity is superior to femininity, there is no greater perceived threat than the existence of trans women, who despite being male and inheriting male privilege, choose to be female instead. By embracing our own femaleness and femininity, we, in a sense, cast a shadow of doubt over the supposed supremacy of maleness and masculinity. In order to lessen the threat we pose to the male-centered gender hierarchy, our culture, primarily via the media, uses every tactic in its arsenal of traditional sexism to dismiss us. So we see this idea of needing to protect women and children created within the system, which could be a nation, a particular population, a town, or a family. This need for safety. This need for safety then gives more leverage to those in positions of power to take more power in order to ensure the safety of the vulnerable or the majority. This can undermine democratic and liberal values without explicitly doing or saying anything against them, instead effectively creating a workaround that does the same thing. Does this sound kind of familiar? Yeah. The leader takes more power in the name of keeping us safe and thereby reduces our civil liberties. Further, freedom and equality become threats themselves. Abortion, gender expression, and other matters are practices of freedom, the issues that women and children need to be protected from in an authoritarian world. Women's equality in any matter that may create an image of male helplessness or victimhood, which is one of the 10 tactics, is seen as threatening through this lens. Essentially, anyone who isn't controlled by a man or man's choices is seen as a threat to the system and its leader. I just need to say, I feel so powerful right now. We are already seeing through just these examples how multiple fascist tactics are being used. There's the mythic past of a time when we all knew the traditional family roles and embodied them, when our perceptions of life seemed one way, regardless of whether that one way was real for many people. Propaganda as a way to spread division and further separate groups from each other. Anti-intellectualism, preventing accurate information from being easily accessible and used in education. This is where and why we canned the diversity, equity, and inclusion measures in a variety of settings. Unreality, as many of the claims we hear about aren't true, again, looping back to the rape accusations I mentioned before. Hierarchy. Victimhood comes into play when, in these examples, men feel like they can't live into their proper roles as providers and protectors, and therefore consider themselves the victims of this supposed threat that they've created. This is also where we get people saying things like, why don't we have straight or white pride month? Law and order would be when marginalized people are attacked and assaulted and even killed as a way to keep a family or community safe, and when their personhood is legislated against. This is why we honor Transgender Day of Remembrance and other such days. Sexual anxiety, again, as a redirection of other anxieties, but that are considered an appropriate expression of anxiety. We're mad about the price of eggs and other groceries, but where can we express that anger? Evidently at trans people. And even Sodom and Gomorrah, because this is the kind of thing that can happen in cities, centers of sin, and if it were to happen in the country, they would take matters into their own hands. Last year, I was able to attend Neville Lombard's spring convocation, and got to hear my colleague, Reverend Jim Fotee, preach an iteration of his Skinner Award-winning sermon in 2023, Resisting Tyranny. Among the many points he raised, one that particularly struck me is the fact that we hear so much vitriol about the threat of the trans community, which in the US at the time, he quoted, and worldwide, is only about 0.6% of the population. I've done another review of the data, and a more nuanced understanding today is that 0.6% is more accurate for older Americans, while younger Americans, particularly younger millennials and younger, represent a slightly higher percentage, probably closer to 1.5% or so. Just for some context, the percentage of natural redheads in the United States is about 4%. This percentage that Fotee quoted about the trans population in the US is somewhat comparable to the Jewish population in Germany at the start of World War II, which was around 0.75%. Tiny and often misunderstood minorities become scapegoats under authoritarian leadership, especially when religion or presumably other charged identities like sexuality or gender can be used to reinforce concerns, beliefs, and misconceptions. Florida's legislative session doesn't begin until March 4th, and somehow, when I looked the other day, there were not a lot of bills on the table yet this term for the Florida Congress. But if we look at last year's, it's no surprise that a number of them that were considered were directed at the LGBTQIA+ community, sex ed, and bodily autonomy. For some examples, S 1120, which was considered last year, was a so-called flag ban bill that seeks to ban public buildings from raising or displaying flags that represent a political viewpoint, like Pride or Black Lives Matter flags. This bill is on the table for the House and Senate to consider again this year. H 1135 is a bill that threatens to restrict information on preventing STDs and unwanted pregnancy for minors, and threatens to deny them access to LGBTQIA+ content because it was considered grooming. That bill did not pass. H 1233 and H 1639, the so-called trans erasure bills, which would require individuals to have their identification licensed or other state-issued use their sex assigned at birth and not their gender identity, under threat of revocation of their license or ID. While these bills did not pass, there has been an executive order that has been issued that has been doing the same thing with passports. H 1291 would prevent teacher preparation programs from educating about identity politics, including courses based on theories that systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege are inherent in the institutions of the United States and were created to maintain social, political, and economic inequalities. That bill passed. H 651 and S 476 targets abortion providers, abortion-seeking patients, and people who help them by allowing lawsuits for wrongful death of an unborn child, and would allow partners or ex-partners to potentially seek damages, including for survivors of domestic violence, which is why this bill was being referred to as the Abuser Empowerment Act. Those bills did not pass. And H 415 and S 436, which would require the Florida Department of Health to create a website using a third-party vendor that features anti-abortion pregnancy centers. That bill passed in the House last year. The effort to overturn the 6-week abortion ban bill failed last year, even though the majority of Floridians supported it being overturned, and the 6-week ban went into effect on May 1st, 2024. What we may fail to understand about these bills and the general atmosphere of living in a state where education and freedom and equity are not valued is that it makes all of us less safe in practice. It turns out that STDs are spread and pregnancies happen regardless of whether or not you know the science. And the most effective way to understand how to prevent or minimize them is through education. There's a famous black and white picture of a big pile of books that was being burned that I'm sure that you've seen. That image from 1933 Nazi Germany. And while it has been used often as emblematic of Nazi philosophy, what I need you to know is that what was being burned was the entire library of the Institute of Sexology, founded in 1919 by Magnus Hirschfeld. The Institute served and treated thousands of LGBTQIA+ patients and advocated for understanding and education regarding LGBTQIA folks. During Nazi rule, thousands of queer people were sent to concentration camps, and even more were arrested and subjected to cruel treatment. After the end of World War II, the article in German law that criminalized homosexuality was not repealed, and many gay folks continued to be persecuted and imprisoned for years, decades. Queer LGBTQIA folks in the United States still have poorer health outcomes in some categories, including those related to productive organs and systems, because some healthcare providers and or healthcare systems are not informed or choose to ignore the very real challenges of this community, including how to care for them as individuals and what to be aware of when caring for them. The thing is that abstinence-only education and other education strategies like not teaching or making available information about sex and sexuality actually harms us all. Children and youth who are educated on the varieties of ways that sex and sexuality can be expressed tend to engage in sexual activity later than peers who have not. And they make better decisions about what and how and with whom to engage in these activities. Education is even more important for those with marginalized identities, whether disabilities are based on gender identity or sexual attraction. For example, I know lesbians who didn't realize until they were older that they'd had sex or that they had been assaulted because the sexual activity that they had had didn't look like the basic birds and bees when a man loves a woman and they fall in love that they had been taught. Good sex ed teaches about the many ways we can engage in sexual activities, about the vitality of consent and enthusiastic consent at that, and about the challenges of relationships, including how to have conversations about sex. It also matters for the feelings and emotions that may come up around sexual activity and its consequences, as well as navigating information from reliable sources. Not everyone goes for regular screenings, in part because not everyone understands the importance of doing so, because many haven't had good sex ed. So here's your reminder: whatever parts you have, get them checked. It matters. Did you ever think you'd hear that from the pulpit? All of our bodies are equally deserving of care from ourselves and those who help and support us in our life journeys, especially those in medical professions. We all deserve to have choices about how and when our bodies are cared for and to be treated with dignity and respect. We all deserve access to good information that helps us make good decisions about how we care for ourselves and help keep us safe. I can't say what the future holds, but I feel pretty confident that the next 4 years are going to be a rough ride. I take heart from the resistance that I see happening, and I pray that it continues. Together, we can help us all get what we need to take good care of the blessings of our bodies, that they may continue to bless us for many years to come. And may we remember that we are all far more interconnected than we might realize, and that what is good for the most marginalized of us will benefit us all. If you would please rise and sing our closing hymn.